Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's installment of Regional Report. This, of course, a GPEC Virtual Series. Now, this webcast will feature experts discussing the future of water for Greater Phoenix and Arizona. Today, our panelists will share their expertise and perspectives on Arizona's water landscape, providing insights into the region's current water position and the factors shaping its future, including the federal government's upcoming decision on the Colorado River. Hello, everybody. I'm Eric Sperling from STN. I will be your host and moderator today. I know many of you on this call have been to our downtown studios before and have attended one of our live tapings. If you're not familiar with STN, we are a local media company headquartered right here in downtown Phoenix. All of our shows and segments are dedicated to local leadership, community impact, and actionable solutions. If you have not been to a taping yet, we've got our season premiere coming up on September 3rd. There it is right there. You will need to register, and you can do that by heading to our website at stntv.com and clicking on the Get Tickets link. If you haven't been to a show, highly encourage coming down and checking one out. All right, some housekeeping items for you today. Today's webinar will last for approximately 1 hour. Audience members will be muted and without video. Now, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the GPEC website and on social media. You may submit questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen there, but due to time constraints, we may not be able to get to all those questions. Now, should you experience any technical difficulties, this is a live streaming event here. Please try logging out, checking your connection, and logging back in. We'll do the same on our end. If you invite to share this information, we do invite you to share this information here on social media. Please feel free to tag GPEC and use the hashtag GreaterPHX together. All right, let me introduce the panelists we have joining us today. We have three tremendous speakers. Alexandra Arboleda, she is a partner at Gammage in Burnham and vice president of the Central Arizona Water Conservation District Board of Directors. Dr. Kathryn Sorensen, she is the director of research at the ASU Kyl Center, and Dr. Max Wilson, the water resource management advisor at the City of Phoenix. First thing, though, I'd like to pass things off to Dr. Kathryn Sorensen. As I mentioned, she's the director of research at ASU's Kyl Center for Water Policy. Kathryn Sorensen brings decades of experience in water management and policy. She previously served as director of Phoenix Water Services and director of the City of Mesa Water Resources Department, where she helped advance the reliable delivery and sound management of water resources across Arizona. So with that introduction, Kathryn, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll send it over to you.
Thank you for including me. Could we go to the next slide, please? So our focus today is, of course, on the Colorado River, but I want to take a moment just to give some perspective, because people often ask, well, why did you build a big city out in the middle of the desert? And I understand that question, but what they forget is that desert cities are the oldest cities, and that people have lived in the Valley of the Sun since time immemorial because of the flows of the local Salt and Verde River system. And of course, the flows of the local Salt and Verde rivers have deposited a massive amount of groundwater as they have flowed through our alluvial valleys. So we have this wonderfully productive groundwater resource beneath us. And that's a really important resource to us looking forward into the future. Yes, the Colorado River is an important supply, and we're going to talk about that. But the Salt and Verde River system and groundwater are just as important, if not more important, to our long-term sustainability here in the Valley of the Sun. Next slide, please. Thank you. These are the sources that actually comprise tap water in the Valley of the Sun. Because we have a large amount of native groundwater and because we have been banking water in our aquifers for many decades, as the amount of Colorado River water available decreases, we can backfill those supplies with groundwater, banked water, and other water sources as well. Next slide. And of course, reclaimed water is another very valuable resource here. We have been reclaiming and reusing wastewater for many decades. Most goes to the Palo Verde nuclear power plant for cooling, but much of it also goes for golf courses, parks and schools, cemeteries, and things like that for turf irrigation. We make extensive use of reclaimed water because we know all water sources are valuable in the desert. But we are also building the infrastructure that would allow us to use reclaimed water as a future tap water source as well. Next slide, please. But the Colorado River system is in real crisis. Due to 25 years of drought and over allocation of the Colorado River, we've come very close to draining the available storage in the nation's largest reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And there's no way to sugarcoat this. Instead, we really have no choice but to confront this reality with the discipline of methodical water planning. I'm confident that we'll overcome these challenges because we have many decades of experience in this methodical water planning. We have many decades of preparation behind us. We've banked water in our aquifers for many decades. We have a lot of experience in managing water in the desert. And I think it's really important to understand that both of these things can be true. The Colorado River can be in crisis, and we can also be ready to withstand that crisis and protect our economies. Next slide, please. Through this methodical water planning, we have created certainty for economic investment in our economy. Our 100-year assured water supply program requires that cities prove that they have legal, physical, and financial access to water supplies adequate to support growth before that growth happens. This assured water supply program, it sets a really high standard, but Phoenix has always been held to a higher standard than other cities. Rightfully so. We need to be able to provide absolute certainty in our water management to facilitate economic investment in our economy. In the face of Colorado River shortages, it will be more difficult and certainly more expensive to prove up our 100-year assured water supplies, but we have to hold to this standard so that investors continue to have confidence in our economy. The solutions are there. They are no doubt politically tough to achieve. They are very expensive, but I really think it's important to remember that humans have been moving water for thousands of years. The technology is well known. It's something we are actually really good at, particularly here in the desert. And I'm confident that we will overcome the challenges on the Colorado River and provide the tap water necessary to support economic opportunity and quality of life here in the Valley of the Sun. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hey, Kathryn, thank you so much. Again, stick around. We are going to have kind of a roundtable Q&A in just a few moments. But next, I'd like to welcome Alexandra Arboleda. She is the Vice President of the Central Arizona Project Board, representing Maricopa County, and a water and natural resources attorney with extensive experience addressing challenges related to groundwater, surface water, and Colorado River supplies. So, Alex, let's send it over to you.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, so I'm going to wear my CAP Colorado River hat today and talk to you a little bit about the Colorado River Basin and the negotiations there. So next slide, please. So CAP delivers our Colorado River water to central and southern Arizona. And I sit on the board that oversees Central Arizona Project. There's been a lot in the news lately about the shortages on the Colorado River, and CAP has kind of been in the middle of those near constant negotiations for the Colorado River. So next slide, we'll start. Here's a map that shows the basin. This is kind of just the basics, but there are 7 basin states and Mexico that rely on the Colorado River. The 4 upper basin states are Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and the 3 lower basin states are Arizona, Nevada, and California. The Colorado River supplies water to about 40 million people. One thing a lot of people don't realize is that water from the Colorado River and its tributaries are transported to many of the biggest cities in the Southwest. So Denver, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Phoenix, San Diego, Tucson, all rely on the Colorado River. Phoenix and Tucson are within the Colorado River basin. All those other cities are outside of the basin and transporting water through tunnels, pipelines, canals. So many people call the Colorado River the hardest working river in the West. The basin also has 30 tribes, 22 of which are in Arizona, that rely on the river and have for many, many years. It irrigates about 5 million acres of farmland, generates hydropower, stores about 60 million acre feet of water, and supports national parks and other environmental uses. Next slide, please. So this just briefly looks at, we've been in this long-term drought for at least 25 years. And you can see the chart on the right looking at snowpack versus runoff. Even in years where we've had pretty good snowpack, we have less than average runoff. And that is one of the things that is most concerning to us looking forward, as planners for the future. If you get years where you have 92% of average snowpack and only 49% of average runoff, you're going to get less water in the system. Next slide, please. And this graph basically just shows since, the ups and downs and how variable the Colorado River system is, but you can see from the dotted lines that the average flows are going down. So if you're looking at a shorter time frame, currently, if you look at the last 30 years, the average flow is about 12.5 million acre feet. And, back 100 years ago, it was thought that the average flow was between 17 and 20 million acre feet. And we're looking at the most probable is that black line for 2026. It is looking very low. So next slide, please. So this shows you the main storage reservoirs. You can see Lake Powell and Lake Mead are very low, 23% of its capacity in Lake Powell and 27% in Lake Mead. And then the upper basin reservoirs are doing better. I think if we look on average, they're about 63% of average. And the total storage in the system is about 60 million acre feet. So 25 for Lake Mead, 25 for Lake Powell, and then about 10 in the upper basin. Next slide, please. So why are we in the news so much? Well, the 2007 guidelines for shortage and surplus sharing expire at the end of this year. In fact, really at the end of September. The new water year starts October 1st. So we've been in, negotiations with all 7 basin states trying to reach a new guidelines for operating the reservoirs and operating the river. We haven't been able to reach agreement with the 7 states, federal government, Mexico, and the tribes. So the federal government issued the final environmental impact statement at the end of July. And we are awaiting the record of decision and the 2-year operating framework for 2027 and 2028. Next slide, please. So this shows you the timeline. In January, the Bureau of Reclamation released the draft environmental impact statement. Then the public comment period closed in March of this year. As I said, in July, the final EIS was published. And then August, we're expecting the ROD and the operating guidelines for 2 years. And then October, Lake Powell will begin operating under the new guidelines. In January of next year, Lake Mead will begin operating under the new guidelines. Next slide. So why is this so concerning for Arizona? Well, the final environmental impact statement, it basically establishes a 10-year decision framework with sideboards. And then the decisions will be made in 2-year intervals. So I mentioned we have the 2027 to 2028 operating guidelines that are coming out very soon. But this will basically mean we're going to be in constant negotiations. And if you can turn to the next slide. So some of the sideboards give us concern. One of them is that under the coordinated reservoir operations, the federal government has indicated that releases could be as low as 5 million acre feet from Lake Powell. Under the Colorado River Compact that was negotiated in 1922, the upper basin states agreed to deliver 7.5 million acre feet per year on average over 10 years. And then also there's an agreement to deliver half of the obligation to Mexico. So under the 1944 treaty with Mexico, there's a national obligation to deliver 1.5 million acre feet. And so that is split, but basically the upper basin is obligated to deliver 8.23 million acre feet per year on average. And so that 5 million acre feet is very concerning. I think what really stands out to CAP is that that all the reductions in the FEIS are coming from the lower basin states, and none are coming from the upper basin states. So that's why I think you're seeing a lot of news in the press, and the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Interior objecting to this, because the 5 million acre feet would not comply with the Colorado River Compact and would be the lowest releases that we've ever seen. Nevertheless, you can turn to the next slide. The lower basin states, even though we haven't been able to come to agreement with the 7 states, came to agreement between the 3 states, and over the next 2 years are committed to essentially 3.2 million acre feet of reductions from lower basin states' water. For Arizona, that would mean 760,000 acre feet per year, and then an additional 300,000 acre feet to get to that 3.2 million acre feet. And then next slide. So I think I probably used up my time, but I would say Arizona remains committed to working with its partners in the upper and lower basin, and the federal government and Mexico and the tribes to come up with a negotiated solution. And where we can't, we're also committed to finding wet water supplies to meet the needs of Arizonans.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for that presentation. And I just want to thank our live audience. As you guys can see, we have close to 400 people watching this live. And I do want to remind everybody that you can use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen there. Submit some of those questions. The GPEC team is there. They will be looking at some of those questions. And then in just a few moments, we will get to live Q&A, where we'll hopefully be able to answer a lot of the questions that you're submitting there. So again, reminder, use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen there. Okay, it's time to hear now from our last presenter, Dr. Max Wilson, Water Resources Management Advisor for the City of Phoenix, where he advises city leadership on water resource issues and helps development and implement the city's water resource strategy. Max brings extensive experience in water management, conservation, and sustainability. All right, you're bringing it home for us, Max. Take it away.
Thanks for that, Eric, and thank you for Kathryn and Alex for the excellent kind of primer as we're here today. And a last thank you just to the excellent GPEC team, Chris and Tatum, and everybody who's been able to put this together today. It's a great opportunity to be able to speak kind of directly with folks about, I think, what is a pressing issue that is ultimately at the top of everybody's mind. As Alex and Kathryn laid out a moment ago, we're clearly facing very difficult challenges on the Colorado River. To put it kind of in layman's terms, the last time that it was this dry in the Colorado River was at least 1,200 years ago. 1,200 years ago, we were still 400 years away from inventing knights in shining armor. That's the last time it was this bad. And as such, we are really at the edges of what our infrastructure and our agreements that exist on the Colorado River are able to absorb. But with all of that being said, I wanted to take a brief moment here and focus a little bit on not just the size and scale of the problem, but the things that we are going to do to ensure that ultimately we maintain reliable water service all throughout the Phoenix metro area, as well as Southern Arizona and in our on-river communities. Because at the end of the day, as a water professional, our job and the level of service that we are held to is 100% reliability for clean, safe water to taps every single day. So I'd like to talk really briefly about how we're going to do that in the context of the challenges that we're facing. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to present this here today as kind of 5 simple steps to saving the Colorado River. Unfortunately, it's probably not going to really be that simple. But I think today, as we talk about these issues, I want to really highlight kind of the order of operations and the order in which we're going to deploy some of the resources that are here. So for those of you who aren't aware, Arizona has been preparing for Colorado River shortage for decades and decades. We've been doing that as a state, and we've been doing it as individual communities. As a state, we developed this thing called the water bank. And what the water bank did is it took excess Colorado River water from times of plenty, and it stored it underground to be a first line of defense in order to protect our communities against shortage should those periods ever come. Obviously, those are the types of days that we're looking at right now when we're projecting significant cuts to municipal and industrial water contracts on the Central Arizona project. I want to be really clear that this is not a forever supply. It's not a supply that was ever intended to last forever. What it's intended to be is a first line of defense to ensure that all of the other individual preparations that our individual communities have set up are able to get spooled up and running in a reasonable period of time. So we can use the water bank. We will use the water bank. And frankly, we should use the water bank because that's what this water was put underground to be used for. So that's step 1. Let's go ahead and we'll go to step 2. Step 2 is that then each of your individual cities are going to start utilizing the backups that they've been developing. In addition to the water that the state has stored underground for times of challenges, we also, as individual cities, have been storing water underground for these exact types of moments. We also have built significant water resources that aren't reliant just on groundwater, right? We focused on expanding storage on the Salt River system, as Kathryn was alluding to, and the Verde River system. We've built giant pipelines through mountain preserves to be able to move that water to where it needs to go to ensure that we have supplies to be able to backfill Colorado River supply shortages should those ever occur, as they're going to right now. One of the things that I really want to emphasize, and something that's I think been a little bit concerning to me in the last couple of weeks as we've heard different narratives develop on these issues, is somehow the idea that dipping into our backups is a sign that we haven't been planning or we haven't been doing our parts. No, we developed these backups for the purpose of being able to utilize them in times like this. And frankly, we're not going to feel bad about dipping into them in times like this when they're needed to be able to maintain reliable water service moving forward, because that is ultimately all of our jobs as a water resource professional. So we'll go now to step 3. Step 3 is if those 2 things aren't quite enough, we'll begin dipping into our groundwater supplies. As Kathryn mentioned in her presentation, the state of Arizona took radical action in the 1980s to protect groundwater supplies to ensure that they would be available for moments just like this. And in the periods where we were to experience very rapid shortages beyond what are in the kind of planning parameters that our resource professionals were working on, we absolutely can and will dip into those supplies as an important way, again, to maintain that reliable water service that we have here moving forward. And then just 2 more steps. I'll go a little bit more in detail into step 4 here as we move forward. And that's that living on groundwater and these backup supplies that we already have is not a permanent solution to backfilling Colorado River shortage. Ultimately, in a world, a hotter, drier world where the same amount of precipitation is giving us less runoff, like Alex was alluding to earlier, we're going to need to develop supplies to replace the Colorado River supplies that we're losing. And we'll go ahead and just click forward one here. And this is where I will tell you the rumors that you've heard are true. These are going to be very expensive water supplies. However, the most important thing is not thinking about the cost of these supplies, but rather their reliability and their availability so that, again, we can maintain the type of water service that all of us count on a day-to-day basis. I will go into a little bit more detail on these because I know this is some of the areas where the community has the most questions. So I'd like to tell you about a few of the supplies that we and other providers across the state are working on developing. So we'll go to the next slide. The first, I think, and most important of these supplies is making sure that we can capture every single drop of water that's available within the state of Arizona. You may remember a couple of years ago that we had a very significantly good winter here in Arizona. We filled all of those reservoirs on the Salt and the Verde River system, and water was actually flowing through the Salt River, down through downtown Phoenix, and eventually to Buckeye and towards the Colorado River. That is a significant amount of water resources, hundreds of thousands of acre feet that we left on the table that could have been captured and used for times just like this had we expanded storage on the Salt and the Verde River systems. Luckily, the Valley cities, nearly every Valley city and almost all private water providers are working together right now to expand that storage, specifically at Bartlett Lake. And what we're talking about doing is building a whole new dam that's bigger than the previous one that will effectively take Bartlett Lake and back it all the way up to Horseshoe Lake, giving you immensely increased recreational opportunities, huge improvements on your boating experiences, perhaps, as well as a more reliable and sustainable water supply for the future. We'll go to the next slide. The water resource that I'm most excited to talk to you about today, and the one that we're really going big on here in Phoenix, is advanced water purification. So as Kathryn alluded to a second ago, water reuse is nothing new in Arizona. Arizona has been leading on water reuse for my entire lifetime. And what we want to do here in Phoenix is make sure that we're taking that next step forward on water reuse, and we're making sure that we get the most out of every single drop of water that we can access. Because ultimately, the number of drops of water that are out there are limited. There's only so much water to be able to go around. We can't create more. What we can do is ensure that what we can access, we use and we reuse and we reuse and we reuse over and over and over again. What advanced water purification allows us to do is to make sure that when we do that reuse, that water is going to the highest and best possible use that is out there. And that's potable drinking water. Ultimately, the highest and best use that we see for water is actually in our potable supply, where folks can choose to use it for drinking, they can choose to use it for washing, they can choose to use it for any of the other uses that you would use for any of the same water that would come out of your tap. We are currently in the process of developing 3 advanced water purification facilities. The first of these is at Cave Creek Road. It's already past 50% construction, and we think we'll be online producing water at the end of next year. We also have a very large facility at 91st Avenue that we anticipate will come on in the mid-2030s. So we'll go to the next slide. A third way that we're working together to develop additional water supplies is through what's called the Secure Water Arizona program. This is a joint program by Phoenix, Tucson, and very soon to be named many more Valley communities that are going to be joining us in the Secure Water Arizona program. This is essentially a process by which the Valley communities and irrigation districts from across the state are going to work together to make sure we develop the next generation of water sharing and saving programs throughout the state towards a goal of ensuring that no Arizona community that utilizes Colorado River water ever experiences a wet water shortage. And then finally, I've mentioned all things that are going on in the near future, so we'll go to the next slide. But I do want to emphasize that there's a lot of work going on right now to develop the next generation water supply for Arizona. I don't think we know exactly what that will be right now, whether it's desalination from either Mexico or California, whether it's the continued investment in groundwater resources here in the state. But ultimately, we need to ensure that we continue doubling down on Arizona's success in not just developing the water that we need for today, but also the water that we're going to need for tomorrow. And then finally, I'd like to go to step 5, and this is the one that I think we get the most questions about, and that's our drought management plans. Ultimately, part of the Groundwater Management Act is a requirement that every single municipal water provider have an active drought management plan that gives their city the authority to make sure they can do whatever is necessary to balance supply and demand and ensure that clean, safe, reliable drinking water comes out of your tap 100% of the time. And I really want to emphasize that element of this because drought management sometimes gets this idea of being a dirty word or as if something has gone wrong. And obviously, we don't want to be activating our drought management plans. But ultimately, what drought management means is that we are doing what is necessary to protect reliable water service. And reliable water service is the core of economic development, it's the core of community vitality. And frankly, in times like these, I think you should probably be more worried if your community's not going down through their drought management plan than if they are, because it means that we're taking the actions that are necessary to protect you. Ultimately, however, all of us, all across the city, across the valley, have a role to play in drought management. That could start with voluntary actions today to be able to reduce water use in the future. It could be mandatory actions in the future if those ever become necessary. And it's critical that if we end up in those types of situations, that we all do our part to make sure we have reliable water supplies. So with that, I'll go to just my final conclusion slide, which is, as you heard clearly from Alex and Kathryn, the Colorado River Basin has a problem. Clearly, there's a problem at a basin-wide scale right now. There is more demand than there is supply. But ultimately, Phoenix and its partners have a plan to ensure that you have reliable water service moving forward. And when I say partners, I don't just mean Phoenix. I don't just mean Phoenix and Tucson. I mean Phoenix and Tucson and CAP and the Kyl Center and all, let's see, what's the number now? 392 of you on this call today. We all have a role to play in ensuring that we are successful moving forward. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Eric.
All right, Max, thank you so much. And as Max just mentioned, 392 of you watching live, and I saw those questions start to roll in. Thank you so much for that. We do have some pre-submitted questions I do want to get to as we start filtering out some of these live questions that are coming in. And I'm going to propose this just to the entire panel. You can jump in at any time. Alex, actually, I want to start with you because I think you were the one who mentioned this has been in the news so much lately, and we keep hearing about it. And we know there are a lot of people in this audience that work in economic development, from construction industry, general contracting, city officials. In your opinion, what is the best way to handle public opinion and then help everyone sort of separate myth from fact as all of these headlines keep coming up in the local news, local media?
Sure. Yeah, I think I think it's important to understand that water decisions really are all local, so we are facing some significant reductions in our Colorado River supply that CAP is going to respond to, and our CAP subcontractors are going to. We are working on ways to essentially firm those water supplies and bring in more wet water where we can, do more conservation and efficiency where we can. But when you look at it, let's say you have a property somewhere and you're concerned, is it going to have a water supply in the future? You really have to just look at that particular city, that particular water provider, where that property is. And our cities, I think, have done an extraordinary job of water planning. I think in Arizona, we look at water first before we do development. And we have the Assured Water Supply Program for subdivisions. The Department of Water Resources approves, permits. And so I think you can feel confident that you're in your water supply if, you have a committed supply from your provider. But in terms of just navigating what's in the news, what I would say is, be aware of what's being written about, but remember that these are very complex kind of in the weeds issues. And sometimes the articles aren't exactly accurate or they don't capture the nuances. And so it's important to stay engaged with organizations like GPEC, or go to the website of CAP or the Department of Water Resources, Kyl Center, City of Phoenix, to kind of get to the real facts about your water supply.
Kathryn, Max?
Well, I think that we often underestimate audiences and their ability to understand nuance. And I think, our best approach is just to hit people with the facts and with the nuances and explain the trade-offs. Yeah, things are going to be really tough on the Colorado River, but put it in context and explain how we can rise to overcome that challenge.
And I think I would add to both that, and those are both excellent answers. It ultimately, while I know we have some media friends on the call today, and I have great relationships with all of them, ultimately, I think that the stories that are that often get the most clicks are some of the ones that are the most sensational, that cover conflict, and it's a lot harder to get coverage instead on the things that we're doing to ensure that we're maintaining reliable water service. And what I see in the water resource community more broadly across Arizona is a group of folks that, yes, is very realistic about the series of challenges that we're facing, but is also equally committed to solving those challenges. This is not the first time Arizona has had to solve a water problem. As a matter of fact, like our entire reason for being as a state is solving water problems. If you look at the founding documents of the city of Phoenix, it's to solve water problems. We're really good at this in Arizona. And ultimately, this is going to be a challenging time. But if we fall back on those muscles, we are going to be able to solve these problems moving forward.
All right, Max, I'm going to follow up with you with another pre-submitted questions, thinking about things that are a bit controversial in the media right now. Let's talk a little bit about data centers. A lot of pushback around data centers, water consumption related to that industry. How are providers managing the water usage and or the restrictions that are now placed upon those data centers?
So I think when I think about data center water usage in general, I think about a much broader category of just like industrial water use, right? Ultimately, as a community, we only have so much water that we can commit to all of the things that we want to do. And when we work on prioritizing what types of economic development do we want to have, when we work with groups like GPEC to be able to identify what are those next big companies, I really think about how can we make sure that the drops of water we have are generating the most benefit for the community possible. And when I think about things that benefit the community, I think about like my kids, for example. I've got three of them, that I want all three of them to have really good jobs. I want all three of them to be able to afford houses, to be able to have successful and fulfilling lives here and not elsewhere. At least my wife definitely would like them to be here and not elsewhere. So I think it's absolutely critical that when we're trying to prioritize where our resources go, we focus on those elements. And in that light, we tend to see that things like manufacturing tend to win out a lot better than some of our more or other resource intensive uses of water that don't produce that same level of economic development.
Kathryn, you want to take on data centers for a second?
I do, because I think there's really important context here. I understand that people have concerns about data centers, but in context, their water use is not necessarily out of line with other urban and industrial water uses across the community. I think that's really important to understand. Some of these data centers use hardly any water because they're air cooled. Of course, that means that they're drawing more power. So there's a nuanced trade-off that we have to confront. But even ones that are water cooled or use a fairly large amount of water can sometimes replace, for example, acres of agriculture that we're using far more water than the data center would ever use. And then really the use of water for data centers falls somewhere in line with other urban uses, food processing, breweries, golf courses, other things that we're very used to. You don't see people going out and protesting breweries, right? Probably because they like the product. I think that understanding that context is really important. And looking at, as Max said, what are the uses that are most worth our water? What economic benefit, what tax revenue, what jobs can we derive when we deliver water to this particular user? And that's really for every individual community to weigh and decide.
Alex, I'll let you take a stab at this because there are a lot of questions that have been pre-submitted and coming in around data centers.
Sure. Yeah, I think I would agree with a lot of what Max and Kathryn said. And the newer technologies that the data centers are using, especially in an arid place like Arizona, really don't use that much water. As Kathryn mentioned, they use more power. So we have to grapple with that. But again, kind of getting back to this point of water being a local decision, I think that applies to data centers as well. There are some places where maybe a data center shouldn't be located, and other places where, yeah, maybe it fits within the land use and the water supply portfolio and that community. And so I think you know, there's a lot of concern about it because the demand has increased so quickly with kind of the advent of AI, and we're all having a lot of growing pains trying to figure out how to accommodate those needs. But Arizona is becoming kind of a high-tech semiconductor hub, and so I think we're going to have to find a way to accommodate some of these new data center needs.
And if I could follow up real quickly on this, the other thing to keep in mind is that the demands that a city or private water company serves change over time. And we are fortunate in that residential water use has become far more efficient than it used to be in the past. Our lot parcels are smaller. That means less outdoor irrigation. There are very few pools that are built today. Indoor appliances are far more efficient than they used to be. The result of this is that residential water use has generally been declining over time, and that gives you some cushion. That gives you some cushion to actually welcome industrial partners who may or may not use a lot of water, but that you can accommodate because other uses in your service territory have gone down. So it's really not a one-size-fit-all situation. Each community needs to weigh the benefits and the costs of providing that service.
What is that breakdown? I don't know if we saw it in one of the slides as far as residential versus agriculture versus industrial. Do we know how much usage is kind of split between each bucket?
I can tell you within the city of Phoenix how some of our water demands are broken down, and I think Kathryn probably can give us a better context of how that fits within the Colorado River Basin. Sorry, Kathryn, if I put you on the spot. But within the city of Phoenix, about 2/3 of water demand is residential. A little bit less than half of total water demand is just in single family homes. And if we break that down into single family indoor versus single family outdoor, what we see is actually the single largest bucket of water use in the city of Phoenix is outdoors at single family homes. And so going back to what Kathryn was mentioning a second ago, while we have seen immense improvements in water efficiency, and we're very thankful to our customers for the work and time and frankly money they've invested in those water efficiencies, the place where we still see the most opportunities for overall water conservation savings is really in focusing on those outdoor water uses at single family homes in particular.
Got it. And that I teed that up because one of these live questions that came in was great because I struggled to understand this. Acre feet is hard to understand on a family unit basis. We talked a lot about acre feet in this presentation. So can you define it in more basic terms or compare it to how much water an average family uses in the valley a year?
Sure. An acre foot is 325,000 gallons of water, basically. It's the amount of water that would fill an acre to a foot tall. And yeah, it's a very awkward unit, but it's what we use out west to measure our water. It's how we think about water. Single family water use can really vary depending on the size of their lot, how many people live in the house, a whole host of factors. But generally, as a family can be expected to use about 1/4 of an acre foot a year. And I want to give you some other context because I think this is really important. Land use is water use, right? How we use our land is ultimately how we use our water. One of the most water intensive things that you can do with your land here in central and southern Arizona is grow crops. And depending on the crop that you're going to grow, you're going to use somewhere on the order of 6 acre feet per acre. The average of urban water use intensity across the Phoenix-Tucson area is 1 acre foot per acre. And in between that, 6 acre-feet per acre and 1 acre-foot per acre are a whole range of uses of water that may or may not be more intensive. Like I said, breweries and food processing and semiconductor manufacturing and all of these things that we associate with our urban environment. And each city has to grapple with how much of that different growth they can accommodate while still maintaining their assured water supplies. That varies city to city. But my point is, because residential water uses tend to be the largest uses in a city, and because those uses are trending downward, we actually tend to have some room to accommodate new industrial growth.
And to put a fine point on that, I think about our water use in the city of Phoenix. So we actually deliver less water to customers today than we did in the year 2000, despite adding hundreds of thousands of residents, despite adding significant industrial capacity, including large semiconductor facilities in the northern part of the city. And I think that's a part of the conversation that ultimately the public often has misconceptions about. I think if we went down on the street or maybe polled there were 368 people on the call right now and asked them, do you think water demand in Phoenix is going up, down, or stable? I think most people would say they think water use is going up, but that's in fact not true. Demand is stable, if not declining throughout Phoenix because of those conservation activities that we've seen. And what that means fundamentally is while drought management and demand management may be a short-term part of the solution, ultimately, this is not a demand problem that we're facing. It's a supply problem that we're facing, and it's going to take supply solutions to address it.
And I'd like to
Go ahead,
just
Alex.
add, yeah, generally in the western states and the Colorado River Basin states and Mexico, you can look at agriculture approximately uses like 75% of the water if you look at a particular state. So that's a big percentage, but that's because it takes a lot of water to grow crops and to grow the food and fiber that we rely on. And for example, in the Yuma area, Colorado River water, but they're producing about 90% of the winter vegetables for the country. So if you like to eat a salad in the winter, it's probably coming from there. But there's still to find a solution for this supply problem that Max is talking about, the hydrology problem. We are going to have to work with agriculture. So our municipal and industrial users are doing incredible things, and our ag users are doing incredible things with conservation and efficiency. But ultimately, there's going to have to be some trade-offs, and there may be we're going to have to work with agriculture to help find solutions. I think when you look at central and southern Arizona, especially central Arizona, we always like to point to the statistic that, we use less water now than we did in the 1950s. And sometimes that's hard to believe, but one piece of that is the incredible conservation and efficiency that we're doing and the forward-thinking, groundwater code and the laws that we have. But also part of that has been this transition from an agricultural area in the Salton Verde River system to more of a municipal and industrial use area.
All right, thank you. I want to get to some of these individual questions that are coming in for specific panelists. Alex, we'll start with you. Can the upper basin release more water to help the lower basins as we have more population than the upper basin?
Yes, so that is part of what the fight is about right now between the upper and the lower basin. So as I showed in one of the slides, the upper basin has quite a lot of reservoirs, but they are much smaller than the reservoirs for the lower basin. So the upper basin reservoirs that can supply water to the Colorado River, we are looking around capacity of 10 million acre feet. But we believe in Arizona that the law is pretty clear that some of that water has to be released from the upper basin reservoirs to meet the delivery obligation to the lower basin. And so we are advocating that the federal government needs to recognize that responsibility and release some of that water to the lower basin. Lake Powell is, I think, at 23% of its capacity. That's the lowest it's ever been since it first started filling. And those upper reservoirs some of them are at 80 or 90% full. But I think we looked on average, it's about 63%. So there is some room to release some water from those reservoirs to fill Lake Powell.
All right, I'm being told I need to get this question in as we start wrapping up here because a lot of questions have come in about desalinization. I think I heard it a couple of times on this call, and this is kind of a general question for the panel. The desalinization of the Sea of Cortez, can the panel provide insight on the potential of accessing desalinized water?
I would say just in general, in a circumstance like what we're facing right now, we need to look at any and all options that are out there. It would be silly to not explore any of the potentialities. I'll say for the city of Phoenix thus far, what we've really been focusing on has been the treatment and reuse of our existing water here. Ultimately, a desalinization plant and an advanced water purification facility, if you were to set them next to each other side by side, you wouldn't be able to tell the two apart because it's the exact same technology doing the exact same process. And so what we've chosen to focus on for our first step is making sure that we're desalinating the water we already have and our treated recycled water, and then we're reusing that directly within our pipes. That doesn't mean in the future we won't look at desalinization moving forward, and I'm really excited to see others in the state exploring how to bring desalinated water, from the city of San Diego into the state overall. But that's been where our focus has been.
Got it.
Yeah, and I agree with Max. All options on the table, but desalinization is extremely expensive. To put it in perspective, we pay something on the order of, let's say, $40 an acre foot for Salt and Verde River water untreated. We pay on the order of $400 an acre foot for CP water untreated. And desal is another order of magnitude. That's probably something